Much like many of your favorite movies, they're based in something. Sometimes they're in the written word, other times they're in ink and dialogue bubbles. Today we're going and looking at The Mask, not the movie, but the original comic book series by Dark Horse Comics in today's episode. As always, I'm the remarkable Remzo Martinez, bringing to you live, additionally, the miraculous Mr. Mark Claire. Mark, we're covering a book that was kind of an out of field one for me, one that I wouldn't have considered myself, but thank goodness that we've got some pimpin' Patreon producers who wanted us. Oh my God, try saying that 5 times fast.
Pimpin' Patreon producers. Pimpin' Patreon producers.
Pimpin' Patreon producers. Pimpin' Patreon producers. Pimpin' Patreon producers.
See, I stopped at 3 because it already felt like too much, but you didn't feel the same way. So
I just had to go ahead and see it through. And much like this book, it was an oddball. So let's go ahead and just wait for a moment and ask the most important question of the day. How are you?
I'm doing quite well, actually. And I just want to address some things that have been said online regarding our adaptation from the book, the original novel of Second Print Comics. Yes, there are some differences. No, we couldn't get all the actors we necessarily wanted, but it's not bad. And if you just sit through it, you can enjoy the ride with us. That's all we ask. Like Ant-Man, like Quantumania.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
Which is based on an original. Well, yeah, which is actually based on some much better comics, but we'll leave that there. You can hear our Ant-Man review by going back next week. Going back in the past.
Well, in the
which
quantum
is easy.
verse.
You have to go into the quantum verse to actually hear our discussion of Ant-Man Quantumania, which we didn't quite necessarily see eye to eye on, although our final scores were oddly close for people that seem to disagree for a whole show, but that's kind of how we roll. But nonetheless, you don't need to go to the Quantumverse. You can just tick back in your podcast feed, or you can go to the Second Print Comics YouTube channel. We are, for some reason, doing this all on video now, so we can look at each other as we argue about, if socialism jokes are funny from Michael Douglas and things of that nature. So you can check that all out in last week's edition and every other week or so, which means next week we will be looking at pop culture with what we call SPC pop. So I think next week. What do we got in store next week? Why don't we do a little preview? I think we're going to be talking about a lot of happenings at DC, mostly at the James Gunn verse and everything going on with that. Although there is a certain new writer and a certain new book that's been announced that we will also address. But I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to go down a rabbit hole.
Named.
He will not be named, at least not this week. Maybe next week. Tune in to find out. Nonetheless, Remzo, before we dive into this story today, as you kind of mentioned about our what was the phrase? Pimpin'
Patreon producers.
Pimpin' Patreon producers.
Pimpin' Patreon producers.
Well, we had the most pimpin' of Patreon producers, our man Jeffrey, who, as you'll see in a moment, he actually just bought us he wanted us to read the Mask miniseries. So what did he do? He didn't just send us a link. He didn't just send us a PDF or something like that. He didn't even just send us the miniseries. He sent us the freaking omnibus, this guy. So he pays us money, our highest level patron, and then sends us a book too. It really doesn't get better than that. But we can just talk about Jeffrey, or we could actually go talk to Jeffrey. So let's go talk to Jeffrey. Let's travel through the Quantumverse.
And bring it to you live. The majestic wizard himself coming in as our Patreon producer of the month. We've got the remarkable Mr. Jeffrey himself. Jeffrey, you went ahead and sent us a very, very special task. You wanted us to go ahead and go through the original miniseries, The Mask, which, as I looked through it, is nothing like the Jim Carrey film, and in so many sweet, sweet good ways. Let's go ahead and jump in. You got so many options you can go ahead and pick for us. Why did this story go ahead and jump out to you?
Well, when I was a kid, my parents, they were, my mom particularly was sort of religious. So, there was a lot of stuff that she wouldn't let me be exposed to.
The rock and rolls, huh?
Well, not the rock and rolls, but,
Democrats.
Well, she wouldn't let
everything
me
is a demon. I know where you're going with this.
Well, she wouldn't let me go into the local comic book shop for a while because of the satanic stuff in there, i.e. Dungeons and Dragons. But
she's not wrong, but that's neither here nor there. That's a whole different podcast.
Yeah, but so we'd seen the movie The Mask when I was a kid, and so I was able to convince them to get me the Mask and The Mask Returns for Christmas. So naturally, I started reading, and I was like, that's odd. This isn't anything like the movie at all. And so I was able to work around that just by chance. And so, it's had a special place in my heart since then.
Bro,
so
that's how I feel about The Watchmen, because my parents always associated comic books with like the cartoons I would watch on Saturday mornings. So one day they were like, "Oh, he wants this book called The Watchmen. He's only like 9-10 years old. Sure, let's get it for him." And then they pull up to the rape scene between the comedian and the first Silk Spectre, and then they're like, "Yeah, this is going back to the store."
Yeah, that's a little heavy reading right there for a 10-year-old.
It's funny you guys say that about the movie, because obviously Renzo and I will dig further into this in the show. And maybe this is just my perspective with my expectations, because I expected it to be way different than the movie, and I was actually surprised how similar it was. But I there are huge differences, and there are obviously very different aspects to it. Obviously, the book is a lot more violent, but I was surprised that it was in many ways as cartoony as aspects of the Mask was, as over the top. I thought that maybe Jim Carrey added a lot of that over the topness himself, but that part actually is very much in line, at least with the initial iteration of the Mask character that we see in this series. So that I actually was surprised in the opposite way as you guys, but they're both true in their own way.
Yeah. But I just figured, this
is where you guys say, "Yeah, Mark, you're so spot on."
Yeah, that's such a cute observation. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just figured, it seems like a comic that's sort of been forgotten over the years. Like even the movie, like nobody really, it never really became a thing past itself. There
was actually a Mask 2 movie.
Yeah,
they came out with
Son
that
of the
sequel in the 2000s, but
no, I think it's just about the dog. Like there's no Jim Carrey involved at all.
Yeah, I think Jamie Kennedy, played.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. It is Jamie Kennedy.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Malibu's Most Wanted.
Yes.
See, now, if you really want to torture us, you would make that our next Kirby Club review to watch.
No,
we
have to set some boundaries.
To watch Son of the Mask. No, I wouldn't do that.
Well, I mean, this guy reminded me of like Men in Black, because Men in Black was also based off a comic book that has almost, just disappeared. Nobody sells it. Nobody talks about it. I mean, it was a popular franchise, of course, had a cartoon series and everything. But I mean, that's another situation where it's like the new property, the new media form takes over the one completely.
Yeah.
Well, not to bury the lead here, but I think we all know that the real reason we became very interested in the film The Mask at the ages we were at around then. Well, Remzo wasn't even born yet, so whatever. But for me and Jeffrey, probably was really the best and peak performance, and I believe debut of one Cameron Diaz in the finest performance of a lifetime. And I mean that on every level, including the dancing. The dancing was incredible. I don't know if that was all her, but they made it look like her.
Yeah. That was a special time, wasn't it?
It was a special time.
When boys became men.
And Cameron Diaz has never been the same. Still a fox, though. Don't get me wrong. Still a fox. Oh, yeah. I would do anything, because I honestly, the original Mask is one of my favorite. It's in my top 10 easily of favorite movies. I fucking love that movie. So the aspects that I enjoyed of that, I was surprised at how much I did find them in this book, in addition to a lot of things I didn't find in the movie. So, of course, Remzo and I will break this down further in the body of the show. But, Jeffrey, I want to thank you not just for being our top-level patron, our Infinity Gauntlet patron. You hold the fate of the universe in your hands here with us. But if that weren't enough, if funding basically this entire operation wasn't enough, not only that, you actually sent us the Mask Omnibus for us to read. I was like, well, maybe we'll find it digitally somewhere. And Jeffrey's like, I am not having that. You are not reading digital books on my dime, on my watch. So not only does this man pay us, but he also is pimping out our collection as well. So Jeffrey, much thanks to you.
Energy.
If only we had 50 Jeffreys, we could do this for a living all day and all night. So Jeffrey, go make some kids and have them support us.
I'll do my best. All right.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jeffrey. We appreciate that.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, that was the great Jeffrey. And I do mean great, because if you send us the kind of cash that Jeffrey sends us and send me books like this, I'll call you anything you want. So I'm going to call Jeffrey great. But Jeffrey's a great guy. We really do appreciate him being our premier patron here. Now, Remzo, I think it's time to dive in. Before we dive into the mask. I always call it the Max, not because I think it's like the Max, but because although are similarities, but because I am retarded and I can't say the mask without saying the Max.
He said the R word. 1 star on Apple.
We're not allowed to say that. All right. I liked it better before they started saying retarded. That was almost an actual review. But Remzo, just like you and me, we both were first introduced to this character. Although I think I was vaguely aware that there was a comic book around the time, but I certainly didn't read it. What were your first impressions when you first saw the Mask movie with Jim Carrey, and recent impressions if you've recently? I rewatched it this weekend, so it's fresh on the old noggin for me.
It's a Jim Carrey classic, and for a film that was using a lot of CGI, you have to remember this is within like a 5-year window of Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Way better CGI than She-Hulk and better CGI than MODOK. No question about it.
Which is a very, very low bar when we're
That's
talking
not a
about
joke
CGI.
either. I think the over-reliance on green screens for everything has made everything just dull because they just say, we'll fix it in post. The post guys will do it. The animators will take care of that. Let's just worry about acting on a green screen, which I think takes away. Whereas before, it was more like we shoot a real thing on a real set with real things, and we just tweak some things with some animation or whatever, so then it still feels like it's in the real environment. That's what bugged me the most about the feel of Quantumania. Not to retread these horses, but I don't think I went on this particular rant of that episode. The whole thing just doesn't feel fake, and it's not just because of a special effect here or there. It's because the whole entire environment feels plastic and fake. Anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a film that also had just a star-studded cast. I mean, we're looking at the first on-screen debut of Cameron Diaz. We've got
and
Ben
what
Stein.
a debut it is!
Yeah. We've got
channeling 12-year-old Mark here, and 42-year-old current Mark. But anyway,
well, she still looks like
even my wife is into her. It's
Cameron Diaz. It's kind of hard
resist.
not to.
Yeah, it really is. But no, I mean, honestly, all kidding aside, this is Cameron Diaz's debut. And I love her and think she's a great actress and has always been beautiful, but this is her peak. This is her it's her debut and her peak all in once.
Yeah, but I mean, we've got Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Ben Stein. We've got Jim Carrey, who at this point is the highest paid actor in Hollywood. Let's think about
already when this came out.
When this came out, I think this is also what solidified it. It's not John Travolta. It's not Tom Cruise. It's not Wesley Snipes. It's Jim Carrey. This is a film that really stands at the top of his, best works. We're talking about Cable Guy. We're talking about Yes Man. What was it?
Don't forget Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Ventura, Pet Detective. I mean, this is in that debut. And I mean, not only did the film do well, but it had a cartoon series. It had a toy line. The Mask was straight pimping when it came out. So with that in mind, it's a very comedic movie. It was very much sanitized, like many comic books are when they are translated to film. And let me tell you, actually reading the first of the 4 miniseries that Dark Horse produced for The Mask, I was shocked. It was like almost the same. You can see a lot of like the key moments, like when he's going between different mask personas, but this is very much a different story, much more different than what I anticipated reading.
Yeah, I was kind of on both ends of it a little bit because I do remember, again, like vague awareness of this being a comic and kind of knowing, I mean, it's from Dark Horse. It's obviously going to be a darker, more violent comic than it is for a movie that is rated PG-13. So I was mentally prepared for the added layers of violence. But what actually surprised me was how accurate to the movie it was in the sense of how over the top and almost comedic the Mask character was. I had always probably assumed that was a lot of Jim Carrey sort of adding his Jim Carreyness to it, which he certainly does, and he makes his own thing out of it and has his own personality about it. But it is very much derived, that personality, that over the top, changing of weird outfits. That is all really from the book, and I kind of assumed that was like cartoony stuff they added on. And so that's the most interesting thing about this book to me, especially from this perspective of being 30 years out from this movie, a weekend out from this movie since we just rewatched it. The movie still really holds up as a good comedy, like a good 90s comedy. It's laugh out loud. I think it absolutely holds up. And again, we have Prime Diaz, which is always nice. But I actually remember it seeming violent when I was a kid, and you realize now, especially next to reading the book, you realize how sanitized the violence was. I think the most violent thing that happened in the entire movie was when he's like the carnival barker guy, and he shoots a machine gun at all these guys, but none of them get hit by any bullets. And then later you see them with these like poles up their asses, and it's implied he basically raped them anally with these like giant street lights or something. But we don't see that. It's just kind of a comedic moment, and even that is played
there
pretty
for the adults taking their kids to see.
Yes,
it.
like us adults are like, oh, they got butt raped, right, Jim? And then then you and Jim and
You
Jim
laugh, but you don't explain why you're laughing.
Was that Jim Werner at the movie with me, making anal rape jokes as he's wont to do? But nonetheless, that was I mean, it's interesting watching it now because it really like you said, the book is way more violent, of course, and even some of the violence in the book, you're like, whoa, that's way violent. They couldn't have done that in the movie. But the slapstickiness of the book, that's what really stood out to me and what really surprised me the most. And I guess it almost makes me appreciate the movie more because I had assumed it was just Jim. He was just Jim carrying up an otherwise serious character, and he really was playing the character. It makes me appreciate that he was playing the character truly to like near perfection in this movie because so much of that was actually derived from the book.
Yeah, this was very much written for Jim Carrey. Before we go ahead and jump in, I need to ask, what is your favorite Jim Carrey film?
Ooh, what, dude? It might be The Mask, to be honest. I have to think about it a little deeper. Let's see. Well, no, it's probably what is the one? It's the Truman Show. Is my number one. But the Mask is not far behind. And frankly, in a Truman Show, I got to be in the right mood for it. You know, you got to be ready to watch kind of a cerebral whatever, what have you. Whereas The Mask, I feel like I could pop on in the background at any moment. So it might even be a more watchable movie, although I wouldn't necessarily rank it higher, if that makes sense. What about you?
Mine would have to be Fun of Dick and Jane.
I don't think I've seen it.
That movie is
It really is that good?
It's really funny. He plays. It's basically.
Or is that the one where they're like robbers, sort of, or something?
Kinda. There.
I
It's
think I have
basically.
seen it.
It's basically Enron. It's basically what happened at Enron, and it has Alec Baldwin before he was shooting people. I forget who plays his wife, but it's just it's a much more toned down Jim Carrey comedy. But there are certain scenes in there, like at one point, he gets stung by a bee. And as he's going to basically, because he's been fired from like their Enron equivalent, he becomes like a day laborer. So he goes and hangs out with a bunch of Mexicans, and all of a sudden he gets stung by a bee, and then ICE shows up, and because he lost his wallet, he gets deported to Mexico. So his wife has to basically help him break back into the U.S. And while he's doing it, he's bringing a bunch of his day laborer friends with him. And it's just, that's just like one minor scene in the film, but that's probably my favorite scene in the movie. But yeah, Fun of Dick and Jane is probably my favorite Jim Carrey movie.
Another good one is Yes Man.
I love that.
Yes
That's my
Man?
number two. That's my number two.
All right, that's probably somewhere in my. If I took the time to sit down and re-rank them, it'd probably be somewhere in that top 5. And I always get it confused in my mind with Liar Liar. They're sort of similar premises in a sense, but they're both. I think they're both pretty decent.
My third would be You, Me, and Irene, where he plays the schizo cop.
Oh, that's the one That's the one I thought was the Fun with Dick and Jane one. Okay, so I don't think I've seen this Fun with Dick and Jane movie.
Fun of Dick and Jane came out in like 2006. It's a more recent Jim Carrey.
That was my everything dark period. It was my comic dark period, my wrestling dark period, my Jim Carrey dark period. So.
Oh yeah, if I had to recommend a movie this weekend, I would definitely say go ahead and grab Fun of Dick and Jane.
I think I've only seen one bad Jim Carrey movie. Do you want to know what it is?
The Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind.
Ooh, I actually don't love that one as much as many do, but that's not what I'm talking about.
That's a sad movie. That's not a funny movie. It is
melancholy, and it's like one of those movies where like I'm not going to say this is a bad movie because I can recognize that it has good qualities and is well made, but I never want to watch it.
When he does dramas.
It's like Wakanda Forever. Wakanda takes forever. I can recognize that there's things that are well done in the movie and that Angela Bassett's a great actress. I can recognize those things all to be true while also saying I would never, ever want to watch that again or force my worst enemy to.
I'll blame you on that one.
No, but
because it was for free.
The movie I'm talking about now it's called The Number 23.
Oh, that is a shit film.
It's really bad.
That is just a bad movie.
I don't know if he's bad in it. It's just a bad movie. He probably did as much with it as he could.
It was a bad casting and a bad movie.
Yes, he is not right for a movie like that, especially a bad movie like that. And that movie's so funny though, because at first it's like sort of a cool concept. It's like little numerology, like mystery stuff, but then it gets so absurd where they're always getting to this number 23, but it gets more and more ridiculous. Like first it's like, 3 plus 1, 5 minus 2, 23. But then it gets absurd where they get to, even if they get to 32, like they'll do this whole -4 over, carry the 3, like 32. And then they turn into each other and be like 23 reverse. It's like, hold on. Now you don't even need to get to 23. You can also get to 32 and then just look in shock and say 23 reversed. That's what that movie lost it for me. But anyway, that's all I have to say about my Jim Carrey rankings.
Well, folks, today we are covering the first Max.
See, it's hard not to say Max, isn't it?
Kind of a pain.
It's weird.
For reference,
now that I incepted it into your mind, you're always
it's gonna be stuck there. It's like my issues episodes. Forgive me. So we are covering this from the omnibus, which carries all 4 of the limited series. The only true separation between them is when one series end and the others begin. So we're not going to be splitting this into issues like we have in other episodes in the past. See what I did there?
Yeah, I did.
Instead,
I like how you walked over that.
What I did was I took all 150 pages of the mask and I broke it down into sections. I'll be go ahead and giving you my notes as we go ahead and recap the story, the art, the stuff that sticks out to us. And Mark will be going in and filling in between and giving his sideshow thoughts throughout this. So sit back, relax.
That's exactly what's going to happen. Yes.
Yeah.
That was a good layout.
And enjoy the mask.
Here it is.
So we are jumping in, and from the Upstart, I gotta say that the artwork reminds me of a limited edition indie series that we covered about a year ago, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This doesn't.
I thought you were gonna say Mage.
Mage. Well, I mean, it looks like Mage. I think maybe because the original Eastman and Laird Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was more recent. I think maybe my mind went there, but yeah, this is very much like Mage. It's done in what I'll say like an anti-Marvel style. This is not what you're going to see over at DC. This is not what you're going to go ahead and see at Marvel. This is way grungier, what I would consider more of a punk rock comic era. Think of Judge Dredd. Think of Barbarella. Think of Tank Girl. This is the type of Dark Horse art that you're going to get.
There's a certain type of art. I just call it like it's basically just 80s indie grunge, and it's like a style, and you can recognize it even by different artists. This is it just feels like an indie comic from the late 80s or early 90s, and they have a different feel. Even the paper I feel like was different. They had a totally different feel, like even the smell, like little details that you can only like know by holding the books themselves. They just felt and looked different than a book from Marvel or DC.
This was the type of comic that you were almost like, should I be buying this? This is
right.
Almost
it felt like
your
you're like
secret.
Yeah, like you're sort of on the comic version of the dark web or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is underground. I mean, this is when I think Dark Horse was at its prime. I'll say that. So we go ahead and start off the first couple pages 1 through 3. Some nerd is buying a damaged green wooden mask from a pawn shop in a seedy part of town. As he's going ahead and buying it, and this guy looks like your like typical nerd. He almost reminds me of who's the guy from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
Rick Moranis.
Rick Moranis. Yeah, he almost looks like Rick Moranis. And as he buys it, he's walking out and he sees that this biker gang rolling by, swooshes past his beat up.
This
jalopy.
Same gang appears is also in every 80s indie comic as the as whoever harasses who will become our hero. This happens in every comic.
It's very much like Warriors come out and play.
Yes.
It's that 80s gang. So they roll by, they damage his side mirror, his car, and he starts yelling at them so they can, basically get his 2 cents. But that's a bad idea when you're a nerd in a shit part of town. So what they do is they swing right around, because as bikers do, and they end up just kicking his ass. So they go ahead and do that. They don't kill him. He goes back to his vehicle, and there's not much dialogue from here. What you're seeing is dialogue balloons, but you're actually seeing illustrations of his thoughts. And this is a demented little fucker. He's just thinking of all these ways to kill them. It's almost what I would call like an Acne style cartoon, kind of like, Pinky and the Brain type of thing. It's almost like that slapsticky cartoonish style you're getting from 90s cartoons. So that's what I remembered as I'm going through this, because it's a different style of thought balloon. So that stuck out.
It does make you wonder if, like, this kind of occurred to me, like, okay, at first I thought, is this guy Stanley just, he's been beat up, picked on his whole life, et cetera, so he's built up these so violent thoughts, or because he already has the mask in his possession, I'm wondering if this is like early on showing us how the mask is already affecting his thoughts by being near him and putting these sort of demonic, like murderous thoughts in his head. So I think you could look at it either way. I think as the story goes on, and I went all the way through the omnibus, so I know a little more than everyone else will by reading this, but there is credence, I think, to the idea that a lot of this there's a lot more of the mask than there is the person, but it's certainly a mix no matter what.
I agree, and I think that's one of those things that's set up to be a question without a clear answer, especially at the beginning of this. And we're going to his apartment. He's walking upstairs, and he's still having these thoughts, and you can begin to see almost immediately, they make no grievance about it, that the mask is sentient, like it's a living thing. So as he's walking and talking to himself as he's going up to the apartment, you hear the mask literally say out loud, "So what are we waiting for? Let's go waste some Nazis." And he looks down at it, and he's just like, what the fuck? So he's thinking that he's either tired, he's going crazy. Maybe it was the ass kicking he got right there. They're just going straight into it. A lot like Mage, now that you've got me thinking about it, where they're just laying it out very clear right at the beginning. So just from here, what do you think of the tone? What do you think of the style? What do you think of the setup? Do you think it's too fast? Do you think it's too typical of other books from the era? Right here, I could definitely tell you that when I was thinking of what would the mask look like before I went ahead and read this was not necessarily the style that came to mind.
Well, I do like, first of all, I do like the art, even though I kind of made the joke about the style. I do really like the art. It feels very sort of realistic and such. And Stanley is somewhat of a stereotypical nerd character. But to me, I think we had to see this a little bit, and I think it's better that they started off with someone like Stanley having the mask, where you can imagine that a lot of the things that he's doing are because of all the torture this nerd has gone through, and all the hatred he's probably built up for bullies and criminals and that sort of thing. So I think it actually, for people that go further and further, and they do get into this even in this miniseries, it kind of lets you understand how much the mask is part of this and how much is the person. But because, like you said, they do kind of leave it open-ended. You don't really know how much is Stanley, how much is the mask at first. But this setup to it does give you the fuel to think that this could be, the mask might just have no personality of its own, or have no desires to cause destruction and mayhem of its own. For all we know, it might be all Stanley's and the mask having the power. So of course that story unfolds throughout. But I do like the setup, and I like that it is a fairly typical setup. The biker gang that we see in all these 80s comics, picking on our soon-to-be hero. They did it quickly enough that I'm good with it. I'm glad it was just sort of, we didn't need to see this happen 10 times. You know what I mean? I didn't need 3 issues of Stanley getting picked on. I saw it once. I could tell he's a nerd. He's having these thoughts. I've seen everything I need to see to understand Stanley and what's going to unfold with him.
Yeah, Peter Parker, we know that you're an orphan who gets bullied at school.
Exactly. I don't need the whole origin story. All right, let's just get to Peter.
So pages 4 through 5, this is where we actually get to learn that our nerd's name is Stanley. Apparently, Stanley bought the mask for his hot girlfriend, Catherine. And right there, I know this is fiction, because a nerd like that is, exactly.
Now she's no Cameron Diaz, though. That's a high bar to match.
Yeah, that's one of the few examples in which a movie upgraded something from the comics. He bought it for Catherine because Catherine is apparently, into collecting weird shit. She actually likes that type of stuff. So
and she does. The most unrealistic part is that she actually likes this. Although it's not unrealistic, she might act like she likes it. It's just unrealistic that she would actually like it.
It's like Marilyn Monroe telling people that she enjoys reading. We don't really believe it. He got the mask because they went on a date downtown, and obviously, she had mentioned, "Oh, I like it. That'd be cool to get." And at some point, they got into a fight. What the fight is about doesn't matter. Basically, he got it to make up to her, because when you're a nerd like Stanley, hot chicks like Catherine don't come around often. So after, talking about it, she celebrates the gift and puts it in her collection. They go ahead and have some makeup sex. Later, they fast forward, and Stanley goes to the bathroom to see that the mask, the wooden green chipped mask, is just there waiting for him as if it moved from the shelf. Pages 6 through 12, things get a lot freaking crazier. And this is a very art heavy book. Stanley thinks that Catherine put the mask there to prank him. So at that point, he's like, I'm going to go ahead and put this on and I'm going to scare her, beat her at her own game. However, as soon as he puts it on, his whole face changes. It actually turns into a big-headed humanoid green freak.
It becomes Jim Carrey.
The mask. This is what you've been waiting for. It happens almost immediately. At that point, this green goonish figure begins to go ahead and take over his entire persona. From here, this is where you just get a montage of introduction and destruction. Everything you want at once.
So that's the music that's playing in my montage for some reason.
Yeah, so he goes on.
The Bee Gees are in my violent montage. Why? I have no idea. That probably says more about me than it does this book or anything else.
You should see a therapist about that. Probably. So the mask goes on a stroll throughout town. And at this point, you're just seeing all the cartoony nature in the character. Think of the movie. It's literally like that in the comics. They literally pulled it straight from this book as to how ridiculous it looks. He's getting into fights of strangers. He's getting hit by cars. You're basically beginning to see what his personality is like and what his powers are. But then what he does, and this is where things really kind of went off the rails for me. He goes to the neo-Nazi biker hangout and begins for like 6 pages murdering, bludgeoning, torturing, sadistically bashing and murdering every biker there. This is some grotesque shit, folks.
This is where it becomes becomes pretty clear here that this is not the movie.
This is not Disney's Marvel. No, this is
not some light anal rape. Okay,
no.
This is serious stuff. And what struck me too is the variety of different weapons he used. Machine guns, axes, machetes. Anything, dynamite. Like he just can conjure up anything to use to portend violence upon others. It's a beautiful sight.
I mean, his powers are basically godlike into how he can go ahead and basically turn into a Looney Tune or an Acme character, dropping anvils out of places like that. So he basically sets it on fire and leaves, laughing. So the next day, Catherine wakes up to see Stanley return to the apartment bathroom. And as she walks in, he is barely turned back into Stanley. So she's just freaking out, like, what the hell did I see? What was there? Am I like tired? What's going on? And Stanley seems to have an idea of what happened. It's not like he blacked out like in certain parts of the Mask, the film, and later has to figure it out. He's pretty cognizant of what happened. So just right there, we got a lot in just a few pages, Mark.
Yep, we sure did. And that's why, the pacing of this is surprisingly fast, but with where the story goes, it ends up working. But I was really taken aback at first by just how we're like not even through an issue's worth. And we've seen not just so much in the character change from Stanley to the Mask, but then these extreme levels of violence that I wouldn't say it makes me uncomfortable, but that's probably because I'm a hardened son of a bitch. It probably should make me uncomfortable because it really is excessive.
It was
and over
surprising.
The top.
It's the fact that you didn't expect it there. It's like watching Mickey Mouse murder a neighbor. You just didn't see it coming.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even knowing in my mind that this was going to be obviously a more violent comic than the movie, I didn't really even imagine half of these pages are the violence of the comic, and it actually works because it's kind of what adds to the overall over the top feel of this entire story. I mean, that is just a characteristic of not just the main character and not just the action. The Mask is over the top. It's part of its definition. It's part of the core of what it is. So it makes sense that everything, including the violence, also be over the top. It doesn't feel out of place at all.
Yeah. So pages 13 through 17, this is where you actually begin to see almost an immediate change from the nerd Stanley Lipkiss that we went ahead and met.
It's going through his venomized Tobey Maguire Spider-Man phase,
goth phase.
Right?
Yeah, it's emo Peter. Bully Maguire. So Stanley looks different. He actually looks more like an asshole, if I can describe someone's face as looking more asshole-like. He just randomly puts on like this, just this old army BDU set, this old army uniform. And as he's watching the news, reading the newspaper, you see that he's got like a Ted Kaczynski, list of names of people he's crossing off. So you're beginning to think like, damn, like this guy's a sick motherfucker. And
which makes you think, did he have that list before, or did he just come up with it now with the Mask? So it does kind of keep that open as to how psycho he already was, does he just have the power now?
Yeah. So Hot Catherine walks out and tries to get his attention, but he kind of shrugs her off, tells her to buzz off while he's watching the news. And then they get into an argument. And the whole tone, the coloring of the book gets really dark. You're feeling like a Chris Brown Rihanna situation. And then he raises not the pimp hand, but the abuse hand, because this is pimp hand, Mark. This
As
is abuse.
Remso has differentiated on various platforms.
Yes, discipline, abuse, discipline, abuse. This is for the YouTube viewers. Discipline, abuse. As soon as he's about to abuse hand her.
Don't mix them up. This decides whether it's a crime or not, Renzo. I think that's how laws work. I'm not sure.
Something like that.
If you're disciplining, it's legal. If you're abusing, that's bad. That's the rule.
So before he's about to abuse hand her, he just kind of like, takes a breath and he just leaves. And at that point, she's like, "Where are you going? Where are you taking the mask with you?" And he's like, "Well, I bought it." And she's just like, "What the hell is going on with this guy?" First off, as soon as he leaves, we meet this pair of mechanics who were repairing his car that was damaged at the beginning of the book, and they're just making fun of this dude. They're like, we've purposely gypped him in the past. We never do a complete job because we know he'll keep coming back. They're calling him a nerd. They're saying, how does he get a hot girlfriend and stuff like that? And at that point, they turn around because somebody is just like, I have the muffler that you're trying to use for the vehicle, and it's Big Head. It's the mask.
Oh, you probably, because you're too young, you don't get the reference. This is a reference to, I think it's, God, man, Midas. Is it Midas? The Midas muffler. They're like, you're never gonna pay a lot for a muffler at Midas. I'm not sure if it's something like that, and that's what I almost called him Jim Carrey. That's what the mask is referencing here when he says the line, "I'm not going to pay a lot for this muffler." It's like it's a riff on an old commercial. But you're too young for that. And that's why I'm here. That's why I brought the old guy along.
I said the Krispy Kreme donuts joke the other day to my colleagues at work. I was like, "Good morning, everyone. It's time to make the donuts."
That's Dunkin' Donuts, Remzo.
That's Dunkin' Donuts? That's not Krispy Kreme?
No, it is not. That's the Dunkin' man.
There was a Dunkin' man?
Back to school, yes. And he made the donuts every morning.
So he kills them.
There's a commercial about it. You just described it.
Pages 18 through 19, we see this revenge spree go further. Stanley goes back to his old elementary school.
I love when he goes to school. It is hilarious. And he gets more angry than any other bar. You can tell Stanley's had a fucked up life, and it is adding to this. Whatever level this is, it is adding to this because he has an extra red-eyed intensity when he is in the school, like stuffing his shoe down the teacher's throat.
Yeah, he's like straight up like torturing this woman in front of a classroom of kids. And what happens as soon as he's basically knocked her out? He has the kids turn into a mob and attack her while she's down.
I'm not supposed to laugh at that,
but it's kind of funny.
But it's kind of funny.
So pages 20 through 20.
What makes this so awesome to me is that I always picture Jim Carrey's voice no matter what the mask is doing. When he becomes the character in the book, I always picture Jim Carrey doing it, even though it's with this over-the-top violence. So to me, it's like, in my mind, Jim Carrey is committing all this violence, and that's kind of hilarious to me.
It makes it even scarier if you think about it.
Much scarier, actually.
If you got an R-rated Mask reboot, this would actually probably pull off today.
I would. They should totally do it with Jim Carrey. Just redo the movie, the same movie with Cameron Diaz. Bring her back too. Just make it way more violent.
I dig it.
I'm in.
Yeah. Pages 20 through 24. The police go to the garage that Stanley was at earlier and find that the two mechanics have been brutally murdered. And I'm talking brutal, folks. Like, this guy's skull is gone. He's just the muffler. The muffler is the guy's head. I don't know how that happens, but that happened. And the other dude is like Texas Chainsaw Massacre hanging from the ceiling. It is some sick shit. Like, he took some pleasure in murdering these people. At that point, he goes and he ends up walking on his way back. It's full of like these like random short interludes. As he's walking back, he sees these two kids fighting. One kid is bullying the other kid, and he just freaking like knocks one kid out, and he's walking by. So he gets back to his apartment and falls asleep while Catherine walks in, worried that the mask is doing something to him. So much so that she picks it up and throws it away, noticing that ever since it came into their lives, Stanley's been acting like a dick. So the next day, he's like, "Hey, where's the mask?" She's like, "I threw it away." They get into a fight, as they do. And she basically tells him that she threw it out. But at that point, Stanley's like, yeah, maybe I don't need it anymore because I did go ahead and kill everyone on my revenge list, basically.
I did do the whole list, so I guess I can just go back to being a normal nerd now.
Yeah, so basically after they calm down after his minor outburst, he's still in his like army BDUs, which I mean makes me wonder, and this is a theory I had, what if they're not just random, what if it's not just a random army uniform? What if Stanley was a veteran with PTSD and the only way he feels safe is when he's wearing his old army BDUs?
That's a theory. It does. He doesn't seem like a veteran to me because he seems like
I met
just a
plenty of
mega
nerds
nerd.
in the army.
All right. So maybe he was abused even more in like basic training and was like the
yeah.
runt of the litter during that, like a little Remzo, pretty much.
He was a barracks bitch for sure. Totally.
I hope. I don't want to know why you know that phrase so well and why it's.
I know a lot of terms that a lot of civilians would be repulsed by. So basically, he's sitting down back in his army uniform, watching TV and laughing at the murders as they're reported on the news. Catherine is disgusted by his behavior and kicks him out. Stanley immediately goes into the trash behind the apartment complex to find the mask. Just right here, this isn't like we can firmly say the mask is not a hero.
The mask is not a hero. Yes, I think that's been clear from the beginning. Yeah, and that's one of the differences with the movie is that in the movie he doesn't ever, and we'll see even more of this as the book goes along, but I don't think in the movie he ever just attacks random people at all. Or even necessarily, I guess he shows joy in hurting the villains. He does, but it's really not, they don't emphasize the pain. It's more the comedy factor and more just like, but it's clearly he's only going after the like sort of thugs and villains in the movie. Actually, it's only these like specific ones that he's sort of having this like feud with or what have you. Whereas in the book, there are no ethical or moral limitations on the mask whatsoever. It's purely chaos.
This is the
destruction,
Joker with
murder.
powers.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So pages 25 through 31, Stanley, figuring out that the trash cans outside do not contain the mask, realizes that's probably still the trash can inside of Catherine's apartment. He breaks in, and as she hears him breaking through the window, she goes ahead and calls the cops. But as soon as he walks past her, she's holding a pan, and she goes ahead and knocks him out. While she realizes it's him and tries to convince the cops who have just suddenly gotten to the door real fast, obviously they're not in Chicago or Detroit, Stanley finds the mask, puts it on, and immediately, without any hesitation, begins attacking the cops who start shooting at him. Catherine begins to freak out like a normal person would, and the mask goes on a murder spree, going to the cops outside the building who have been responding to the gunshots and everything, and just massacres them. Like there is like no chill. He is straight up murking people.
He even has a bazooka. He like blows up the apartment building with a bazooka. I mean, this is not like the petty slapstick, again, light anal rape, as you might say.
This is beyond Punisher level violence.
Yeah, it's probably the most over the top, unprovoked violence you would, because I mean he goes after people that just are just there. I mean we'll see more of this later on. The most unprovoked violence I've probably ever seen in a comic.
Yeah, I mean,
or the most violence period, perhaps, but definitely the most unprovoked for no reason violence.
It's grotesque. You almost feel voyeuristic watching it.
But it really does drive home like that. That's what makes this so interesting, is because we can tell Stanley's kind of bad, but like it's very clear, and this becomes more clear. And I think the big difference between this book and the movie, it does happen a little bit in the movie, but this book, the mask travels from character to character. I think it's mostly on Stanley for this portion of it, but it is more about the journey of the mask across characters, whereas the movie is specifically about the Stanley Ipkiss character who's played by Jim Carrey, who's not nearly as nerdy as this or as psycho as the Stanley Ipkiss in this book.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because for people that have only seen the movie, they're going to be a bit confused by what happens a couple pages from now. Pages 32 through 42, things just get wild. The cops go ahead and investigate the scene of the crime and interrogate Catherine. This is when we're introduced to another major character named Lieutenant Kelway. Remember this name. at this point, Catherine begins to realize that the mask was completely taking over Stanley and making him act the way he has been. And this is where you get more examples of the thought balloons actually carrying illustrations. Mark, just on that, what do you think of that? It's more show, don't tell, because usually it would have been like, as I was reading, it would have been like, wow, is the Stanley, the lovable nerd I know, really capable of being a killer? Instead, it's like Stanley plus mask equals big head.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The two of them combined equal big head. Although and that's kind of like how she puts it together in her mind. Yeah. I like that we just had that instead of like 5 or 6 pages of investigation and her trying to figure
show,
out
don't
exactly.
tell.
And that's what I think this story does a pretty good job of. Like I said, I read the whole omnibus. I don't usually do stuff like that. Like, it takes me a long time to get through stories. Sometimes because they just get too slow or they slow down. This is such a not boring book that's so easy to get through because of reasons like this. They will take what in some other book would be 4 or 5, 6, maybe an issue of her figuring this out. Nope, just one panel. She puts it together in her thought balloon, and of course, it all makes sense. Like Lois Lane could learn a thing or two about her, but she figured this out really easily, even though he's got a whole mask and everything. But I like that about this book. We don't really waste time on moving the story along. We always move the story along so that we can get to more violence.
And speaking of more violence, now the mask is hunting down a guy named Gary McWhitter, a dude who owes Stanley money. And what does the mask do? He gets in the car and starts chasing this dude through downtown. Absolutely terrifying. Eventually, he runs into more cops. And just like what we saw about a dozen pages ago, he goes on I can only describe it as like an anarchist, like guerrilla style Vietnam attack spree. He's mowing down people with freaking Uzis, with flamethrowers,
battle axe.
This is Mortal Kombat on crack.
He is going insane.
This is Grand Theft Auto level proportions.
In the one scene, he's got a flamethrower in one hand and what looks like an Uzi in the other, and it's just blasting every single human around. You see eyeballs being shot off. You see blood. You see explosions. It's death and destruction everywhere. This is so far above and beyond anything from the movie now that it's barely recognizable in terms of the level of violence.
Yeah, and what should be noted is that all this is happening out in daylight. Like, there are witnesses, there are civilians, and the mask, or Big Head as he's later nicknamed, is really like, people see him as a villain. He's a monster. He really is at this point. So his reputation is this guy is going to murder and kill and maim everybody in his path.
Yeah, there's no conception of him being some kind of anti-hero or anything like that, like he kind of is in the movie, and like a lot of other books would take with a character like this. Even say like a Judge Dredd or what have you is very violent, but is still seen as like a protagonist of sorts. Is still seen as
Dredd
like,
has a code.
For. Exactly. Dredd has a code. The mask has no code at all. His code is death and destruction as much as I can push this host body to allow me to just use my powers and go wild on, because that is the point. There's no ultimate end goal. I think that's what makes the mask such a scary character. He's not presented as the villain. He's sort of the lead, but he is a villainous. But it's what's so frightening about it is that he's not trying to achieve an end. He's not trying to right a wrong. His end is the violence. That's what he's there to do. There's no other reasoning needed.
Yeah, this is Looney Tunes plus Grand Theft Auto.
that is a good description.
Yeah, so
starring a demented Jim Carrey.
Yeah, at the end of this, Stanley checks into a local motel. He's getting situated, wondering what his next move is. And as he takes off the mask, and they move fast in this book, folks. As soon as he takes off the mask, he is shot and killed by Catherine. Catherine takes the mask, quickly puts it on, shoots Stanley, and basically she has done this after realizing that all this destruction was him, and that's the only way to stop him. And he's not dead coming back later. He is dead. The character who we thought was our lead character, the character who Jim Carrey plays throughout the Mask film, is just a nerdy, violent psychopath who is killed by his girlfriend.
He's a throwaway. He just happened to be the first iteration of this we see. I really like, again, talk about moving the story along. Any other book, this would have been a 6-issue arc, a 12-issue arc, as she grapples with what to do. I think that's I don't know if it's realistic. Who knows what any of us would do in a situation where our significant other became a murderous mask person or what have you. But I also like the little the little part where she had to put on the mask to do it. Like she knew inside her, like
She had to dissociate.
She needs to stop him, but she's actually not a killer, so she knows she has to put the mask on to be a killer. So she does that, and then immediately takes it off because she has seen what can happen to someone who gets too immersed in it. But even then, it is kind of like a thing where she has a bit of hubris of herself because, at least for this moment, she thinks she's the only one that can be responsible enough to take the mask and do something with the mask, although she does try to get some aid with that, as we'll see as we move the storyline. But this had to be like probably the end of the second issue or something, and what we think is our lead character just gets killed.
What did you think of Jim Carrey's Stanley Lipkiss just being shot like that?
Well, I don't see this guy as very much as Jim Carrey, but it was surprising, especially because when you see the movie, you just assume he was the protagonist of the movie, so that's what we're going to see him throughout this whole series. But as soon as he died, that's when, in that moment, I realized, okay, this series is about the mask, whereas the movie, it's really about, yes, the mask is the instrument for the story, but it's really the growth of the character that we're looking at is Stanley Ipkiss. It's his journey. It's him sort of conquering his own demons through the mask.
It's a hero's journey, whereas this is a lot.
This is a demon's journey right here.
Yeah. Pages 43 through 53. This is where we really get to meet who I would consider the true protagonist of this. I think
series. Our pages are off, or your notes are off, because everything you're talking about has happened 10 pages later for me.
So I numbered it because people might also be confused by this. I numbered it based off when the actual story starts.
Oh, so you renumbered it?
I renumbered it.
Why would you do that?
Because it made sense to me.
Okay, but it's not going to make sense to anybody else, including me. But that's funny. That's a very Remzo thing to do. So we'll just carry on.
It worked.
So if you get the omnibus and you want to follow along, you have to renumber your book starting at page 5. And if you call page 7. So if you call page 7, page 1, then you should be able to follow along with us.
Listen, people, I ate Michelle Obama meals in school. I ain't good with numbers. So anyway, Catherine gives the mask the next day to Lieutenant Kelway, who's been on the mask case since this whole shit show started. She basically goes ahead and just reveals everything to him about why Stanley was the way he was, about what the mask has been doing, and that, she hasn't outright said that she killed him, but what she basically said was, I don't want this freaking thing. So she goes ahead and gives it to him for safekeeping, but warns him not to wear it. He tells her he'll keep it safe at his place, but instead, as soon as he gets home, he puts it on, and as soon as the whole rush of powers and the masked persona begins to overwhelm him, a good righteous cop who's upset with the corruption and the crime in the city, realizes that maybe unlike Stanley, who is a creepy psychopath, maybe he can use the powers of the mask to actually go after all the crime in the city his way. Right there, you have something that rarely happens. I don't think we've seen this really in any of the books that we've covered. We have a protagonist shift. Were you ready for that when this happens? Because right now we're pretty much sold. Now everything is prologue. Here's where the real story is starting.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Even after Stanley was killed, I thought, okay, either it's going to go to his girlfriend or she's going to throw it in the river, and we're just going to go in a whole different direction. We're just loosely tie other stories, Cat's Eye style, together through the mask. No, we're just shifting it to someone who is. This is what's interesting is that we do actually find out that. The answer to my question before is yes and no. It is the person a little bit because Calloway does do some different things, at least at first with the mask, but it also is the freaking mask. We learn that it's a little bit of everything, but there definitely are some differences between Kelly and Stanley for sure. I don't even know if they call him Ipkiss in this. I might just be taking that from the movie.
They mention it in the first couple of pages.
Yeah, I mean, Calloway in the movie is played up like a total doofus. This Calloway is a lot more kind of like, he actually is maybe the one character you do kind of root for. Like, he, at least at first, he does kind of seem like sort of like a cool guy. Like, he's kind of on the case, and then he's like, all right, I'm going to go and just use this on villains, on bad guys. And
he's
you can
a Mark Wahlberg type. Okay.
Yeah, and you're like, well, maybe I could get with this. Let's see where he goes with all this.
Yeah. So now we actually shifted to more of the antagonist for the book.
I can't get over the renumbering. I'm just gonna think.
I'm just gonna carry through the section.
Like, did you rewrite them in your book? I'm picturing you literally renumbering pages with a marker so that the book is numbered more to your liking. Anyway, moving on.
Such hatred, such hatred. We go ahead and meet a guy named Stephen Lister.
We should have a Patreon level where Remzo will renumber your book to whatever he thinks makes the most sense. So you mail him a book.
I just wanted to go off of where the story actually begins for people that might
He
have
takes your book,
comics.
and on page 9 or whatever it is, he just writes number 1, and then he goes through the whole book and renumbers it.
I was so proud of my annotation. I was
Anyway,
so
go
proud.
on. I'm
so
following
now
along.
we meet this guy named Stephen Lister. Stephen Lister's a guy who works for the government, and he's meeting with these mobsters who are obviously doing mobster shit. They basically go ahead and bribe Lister, who we don't know what he does yet, but he looks like a bureaucrat type, to go ahead and release this police informant, this criminal who's been providing information to the cops, who's attached to a case that is giving the mob some headaches. From there, Kelway, meanwhile, begins to figure out what the mask powers are basically all about as he goes and basically harasses and chases down some armed robbers from this convenience store. He's all cartoony as ever, and he's just basically killing these people Punisher style. So this is basically, while Stanley had multiple issues of going on a killer rampage, we see that Kelway is way more targeted. He's definitely just going after bad guys.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So now what we have for the next 4 pages is Kelway the next day gets a call from Catherine, who's worried that he used the mask after she went ahead and heard some stuff about this guy.
Because she's got those
green
smart
head.
thought balloons. She puts things together quickly.
She's smart. She needs to go ahead and teach Lois Lane a thing or two if there's ever a crossover. She's like, hey, this sounds like you used the mask, and he lies and says he didn't. Meanwhile, the police captain told him that the witness in the mob scene in the mob case is getting basically swept under. He's getting released. The case is getting put away. This basically drives Kelway mad. This is when we learn that Stephen Lister, the guy who was meeting with those mobsters the night before, and I need to also mention that the main mobster in this book is this guy named Rapaz. Basically, he's your Italian goonish type of mobster. He's the one who went ahead and, is bribing all these officials and cops and stuff like that. This is when basically Stephen Lister walks in the room and reveals himself to be the assistant to the district attorney. He was the one who was paid off by Rapaz and the mob to make the whole case disappear. Right now, this is basically us getting the real story, like what is really going on, who's the protagonist, who's the antagonist, what is happening. Now we have a full depth of understanding. So really the first couple issues are just prologue to this. This is where things really matter. Yeah,
those issues are basically to show us the power of the mask and to show us the depraved lengths that this I guess this entity, as we'll find, is capable of. But now there is a deeper sort of story underlying this city, and there are a lot of characters in the background, a lot of goings on, and that's where Kellaway comes in because he's been following the greater story of the city's crime ring, which is what this becomes more centered around. Whereas for him running across the Big Head murders, we're just kind of like, that was kind of like a day in the life. That all happened really fast. That just kind of passed Kellaway's desk. But now that he has the mask, now that tool is coming into this other journey, this other sort of this area with some deeper lore behind it.
Yeah, and we get what I call basically like a montage of Kellaway going around fighting
the
gangs,
Beatles again,
doing
the Bee
crazy
Gees coming
violent
again.
shit. He's basically going around being more of a vigilante, whereas when Stanley had the mask, he was just a psycho serial killer. So while he's doing that, we go ahead and shift perspectives over to
be clear, though, he's still pretty violent. He's when he does the violence, it's still
he's
pretty
like
over the
Venom.
top.
He's like a lethal protector.
Right. He's just a little more targeted, not just like killing the world like Ippicus was, but he's no angel here. He's enjoying himself.
Yeah. We go ahead and shift perspectives to Rapaz, the mobster who has found the witness who has been released by police protection. And this is when we go ahead and meet this creepy goon named Lunk. Lunk is basically what I consider an Acne-style villain. He's gray. He looks like a hulking character. He murders the witness, and Rapaz has basically gotten his way. From there, Kellaway is brought in the next day and shown the body of the informant who was killed by Rapaz and Lunk. His death was classified as an overdose, meaning these cops are corrupt as hell, or as I call them, the Annapolis Police Department. But that's a whole other thing. Kellaway realizes that this doesn't appear to be the case of an overdose. Immediately, he begins to realize that the assistant DA, the guy we met earlier, Stephen Lister, is very suspicious and thinks that he may have been the reason that the whole case was thrown out and the witness was killed. So Kelway, much like Catherine, puts shit together fast.
Yes, he does.
Are you happy with this pacing? Like,
I
even
do like
all
this
he
now.
just kind of figures it out like really freaking quick. There's no speculation.
I am, just because it's part of what makes the story so different, and it just gets us through. Like I don't need a investigative crime drama out of this. That's not necessarily what I'm looking for. That becomes part of the story, but it's not what I'm here for, and they seem to know that. By the way, this book, we skipped the most important thing, and that is talking about the creators. Script by John Arcudi and awesome art by Doug Mahnke, who I believe did a lot of Batman work in the early 90s as well.
Nice,
so anyway,
nice.
Just a little diversion to thank our creators. And our creator. There's also a religious overtone here. Anyway, go on.
So mote it be.
Catherine,
Catherine,
I'm good with it. I'm good with the pacing.
Catherine calls Kelway, and without outright telling him, she knows it's him going around wearing the mask, killing all these criminals. Warns that if he goes any further, he might find himself in danger of his life. So she's actually grown some. Like, part of me thinks, because
she's got the biggest balls of anyone here, because she doesn't have a mask. She had it for a second, but she is making threats against a masked Kellaway here, and it's pretty fucking awesome.
The mask goes ahead and tracks down Rapaz and Lunk, who have just killed a would-be assassin. In a cartoonishly long fight, the mask basically electrocutes Lunk and sets Rapaz on fire. This is the one scene that really...
Cartoonishly long is a good way to put it.
Cartoonishly long. This is one of those fight scenes where it's like, oh, this was totally like taken in the movie and just changed around a little bit. Like, it is so funny, folks. You have to see this to understand it fully.
Yeah, I think we're kind of like glossing over some of the comedy aspects of this because we're focusing a lot on the violence, but the comedy that you see in the movie is all there. I mean, he does like a Frank Sinatra sort of song thing. I mean, you can picture Jim. He does the same thing with the carnival thing with the making the balloon poodle turn into the. I mean, he does so much comedic stuff that they lifted right directly into the movie, which is just it makes the casting of Jim Carrey all the more perfect because anybody could probably pull it off the violence, but only Jim Carrey could have pulled off this kind of comedic, over-the-top, cartoonish stuff that is in this book from the very beginning.
Yeah, and I mean, he electrocutes Lunk, and it basically looks like any cartoon where a character gets electrocuted, except you're pretty much assuming he's dead. And then what does he do to Rapaz, the mobster? He sets him on fire. Damn.
You gotta send a message sometimes. So yeah, again, the mask definitely makes you do more evil things, even if you're targeting that towards maybe what you might call a better place like Kellaway is.
Well, speaking of Kelway, things don't really go well for him. He's pulled off the mask case because of all the destruction. The police department thinks that he's a failure. They use him as a scapegoat. The city wants answers. The bureaucrats demand solutions. However, the police captain found a witness who thinks he may have seen him turn into Kelway. Potentially, we have a lead on who the mysterious big head that everyone is talking about is. And at this point, Kelway is freaking the fuck out. So this witness only agrees to meet with the cops at night at the local harbor. And who do they send to talk to him? They send Kelway.
Of course.
He takes advantage of this, and this is when he starts to turn a little bit more diabolical, not wanting anyone to have an ounce of a clue as to what's going on. Kelway basically threatens the guy as the mask into running away, threatening his life if he were to say anything to the police or anyone else.
This is where you start to see, at least to me, this is how I take it, is like, yes, Kellaway starts off more clearly targeting these specific bad guys that he's been dealing with. But as the story goes along, the mask influences him more and makes him more and more depraved, not just in the acts and the way that he kills people, but also in what he's willing to do. So I think there again, it's displaying that there is definitely a combination of the ethical boundaries of the human host along with the influence of the mask. But I think that the longer the human host has the mask and embraces the mask and goes through the rituals of death and murder with the mask, the more and more it comes under the influence, even when he's not wearing the mask. Because you can even see that Kellaway, when he's not wearing the mask, has a different attitude about him too. He's going through his own little Bully McGuire mode. You know, he's getting all cocky at the station and everything. So you can see the influence of the mask throughout the progression of really every character that wears it ultimately.
Yeah. And now the mob is frustrated that somebody is messing with their operations involving heroin and money laundering and everything else. And they begin to really think that because of everything happening in town recently, that it could potentially be a cop that's undermining all their shit. From there, because Rapaz is dead, a whole mob war breaks out. They go ahead, and one set of mobsters goes ahead and goes into this restaurant. They start murdering this other rival mafia group, and they take hostages. Well, Kelway is tasked with the hostage crisis as a result of the mob hit at the local restaurant. And for just a whole issue, he's just murdering people. Like, this should be a really comedic scene. And it still shows that he's in control. But like you said, Mark, he's in control to an extent because he is just murdering everybody. So quickly, as soon as all the, as all the gunmen are subdued, Kelway walks out as himself. He's greeted as a hero. But then once people actually start to see the grotesqueness of that, because they can't say that the mask was in there, Big Head wasn't responsible for this. No, it was Kelway, right? They're like, Kelway, you straight up cut people in half, blew heads off. This isn't just murdering bad guys to save hostages.
Like, this doesn't quite look like self-defense, dude.
Yeah, this is like some Dexter level shit. So they go ahead and basically fire him, basically kick him out of the department for just grotesque violence. At that point, Catherine knows that Kelway has gone too far and demands the mask back from him. But before things get too simple, Lunk turns out to be alive and kills the last of the opposing mob bosses.
Are you calling Walter Lunk? Is that what's been happening this whole time?
Is that his name?
I was so confused with every time you said
I
Lunk.
thought his name was Lunk.
Walter, the big huge dude who he burns and electrocutes.
They nickname him Lunk.
They always call him Walter in my book. I don't know. Maybe I have the Remzo specially renumbered and renamed edition.
Shush. Oh, shush. Well, anyway, big goon guy, Walter, turns out to be alive, kills the guy. And what happens when he gets arrested later? Because he hasn't put up a fight. He does so because he's being defended by the DA's office, who turns out that guy, Steven, is part of the mob's heroin trade. From there, Kelly decides to go full vigilante justice and takes the whole thing into his own hands and goes after everybody involved. And as he eventually gets over to the assistant DA's office and the DA's office, instead of killing Lister to actually show that he's a good guy and not, like Stanley or anyone else who's just a violent sociopath, he leaves him for his old police partner to find and arrest, while also providing evidence of a detailed journal of names and locations and stuff like that, heroin, a bundle of cash, basically everything showing Stephen Lister's involvement with the mob. From there, as the cops are outside trying to figure out like what has really happened, what's happening, again, all this blood and gore and violence and destruction, the mask comes out and actually begins to gloat about doing the cops' job for them outside the scene of the courthouse.
It feels very Jim Carrey again. I can just picture him. I mean, the movie didn't go into this part of it at all, but you can picture. I almost want, this makes me want a more, like you said, a more violent, like a Mask sequel where they get into more of this side of it. But anyway.
Yeah,
we would need a better Kellaway, though. He was a joke in the movie.
Yeah, he basically starts gloating, and from there, the cops, without even thinking, they pull out their guns and start firing at him, but he shrugs them off. And this is the first time the mask actually looks pissed. As soon as all the bullets have landed and he's still there standing because nothing can kill him, he just looks at them like, you know what? You actually pissed me off. And he starts another cop murder spree and almost kills his old friend and partner. But as he begins to, break apart from the mask persona, the big head persona, Kelway realizes that the mask's ultra-violent actions are too much and decides to go back to his house and bury the mask under cement, as Catherine, who found out where he lives, is banging on his door, demanding that he give it to her so that way she could hide it where no one, not even him, will know, because this has to stop. Not knowing that he's in the basement and he's actually buried it under concrete. And that is where this first series, The Mask, leaves us, fellow listener.
Yeah, I like that we see a lot. We never really see a moral conflict at all with Stanley. It really seems like he was just a total psychopath in there. I think that part becomes really clear, even taking into account the influence of the mask. But Calloway is a little more complex of a character. He does seem to, like, at his core, kind of want to do the right thing. And I do love that twist. Like, you just think, okay, the Calloway's finally got the mask under control. He's kind of done the right thing. Yeah, he's still over the top, still over violent, but you know, he's finishing the case. He's getting it to his partner, and then just when you think that he's like almost gone straight, he goes on another killing spree. But I also like that moment there where Calloway has his partner and is like about to kill him. I think he's like his eyes are bleeding. He's about to kill him, and he looks at him. He's like, oh my, and he realizes like how much the mask has turned him into something that he's not and cannot unleash on the world, which causes him to sort of finally take control and bury it. And I could go on about what happens in the next two miniseries because since I read this whole omnibus, I'll just say I really enjoy where it goes, and that's really all I'll say. I don't want to spoil anything else for anybody that wants to read it. We already spoiled this miniseries, so we'll leave it at that.
Well, I'm definitely gonna be finishing this omnibus, but before we do that, let's go ahead and kick off with our ratings. Mark, go ahead and start us off.
Tough one too. We'll start with the art. The art is good. I would call it good. I would just call it very good. I wouldn't call it par excellence. I wouldn't call it the best art I've ever seen. It does fit the story very well. But I would say the art is about where it should be for a story like this. I'm going to give the art like a 3.5. I think the art is
it's grungy, which is a very acquired taste.
And I really like Doug Mahnke as an artist, but as you've kind of pointed out in the past, the art was very good here, but I could picture other artists doing it. It's not like it had to be Doug Mahnke's art, and I really feel that it is very similar to many other artists of the era. It doesn't really stand up necessarily above and beyond any of them. So 3.5 is still very, very good art. So I'm gonna stick with that. I almost second guess myself there, but I think it is very much lifted up even more so by the story. See, that's the thing with art to me. This is what I like to tell myself. Would I look at the story differently if it had like different art, you know, so to me, like this art is interchangeable with a lot of other artists. It didn't like make the story, you know, it didn't make or break the story. It was just what it needed to be for the story. Whereas there are other books we've looked at for sure, where the art is an essential part of the story. So that's kind of where I put that dividing line. But the story itself here, and especially due to what is ultimately, and doesn't seem like it at first, but it is ultimately complexity in these characters, based on sort of how the mask influences them, how they are able to walk their own ethical boundaries and ethical lines within the mask. I do find that a really compelling story. There are some tropes in this for sure, you know, like the 80s biker gangs and things like that, but it's different enough and takes me on enough twists and turns, especially as you go through this omnibus, that it always stays interesting. Maybe a good criticism that you put forward is sometimes there is just a little too much putting things together and moving on, but that's kind of what makes the story so different to me and why it stands out a lot more. So I like the story a lot. A 5, no, but I'll give it a 4.5. So that brings my total to 8. I'm giving it an 8.
Well, I'm pretty much with you on the artwork. Could I imagine other people doing this, and would it change much of my perception of the story? Yes and no. I gave it a 3.5 because it's just good for this. It's not always very clean, and by that I'm not saying like the gore and the violence. I mean, it's just it switches between being grungy and being like, you know, Looney Tune slapstick, which, you know, we've seen in other books. We saw this in Mage. We saw this in you know, in the Max,
TMNT,
you know,
and
TMNT. I mean, it's very much of the era. You know, it's appropriate for this, but I could see other people switching in and out. I think 3.5 is more than fair.
The Mask, I'm going to say, to me, the Mask stood out as being above and beyond. To me, the Mask, the art of Sam Keith, more than made the story. Not singularly, but it was integral to the story. Whereas this art is not as integral. I would say it still is, but not as integral. That's my.
It gets the job done.
It gets the job done. Yes.
Yeah. For the story, I will give it a 4 because while it's very, you know, it's very like straightforward with everything, it does carry that moral undertone. There's not many stories that are willing to kill the protagonist and then do a complete protagonist switch right in the middle of it. So I found that to be interesting. It was very refreshing to kind of see that. It subverted my expectations. And I think, you know, the fact that Catherine actually plays a significant role, she's not just like, you know, a token, you know, love interest or something like that. I thought that was very interesting. And all the characters are very, you know, they're very separate and cut and dry individuals in their own right. There aren't people who blur, you know, roles or anything. So I really liked that. I think giving it a 4 is pretty freaking good. More than I thought I was going to give it, if I'm being honest. I had low expectations for this because I thought it was going to be very slapsticky from the beginning. So I'm giving this all 4 issues of the original Mask series a 7.5 out of 10.
Pretty darn close. Pretty darn close, I'd say. So firmly in the, I would say that's just on the borderline between Sunday read and excellent. Someday we're going to need to come out with an official meter, an official ranking system. But it's certainly on the better end of what you might put into a Sunday read category, I would say.
If you see it on a shelf, especially the omnibus, I don't think you'll regret getting it.
Yeah, especially if you like the movie too. I think this is not a book you're going to read and be like pissed off because of how different the movie was, or vice versa. Like it's very different, but it fits.
More entertaining than the movie.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're certainly different mediums, but I think they respect each other in a way that I think you can, even with the big differences in them, one is clearly made more for kids and one is definitely not. The movie respects the source material, but not just respects the source material, like it really draws from the source material in a way that makes both of them sort of feel cohesive, even with their vast differences.
Yeah. Well, that's all she wrote, folks.
That is
Mark,
all she wrote.
You want to take us home?
Take me home tonight. I don't want to wear that mask till I kill some people. Damn it. See, this is why I'm not a professional battle rapper, because I couldn't rhyme that final line with anything. I had to rhyme something with night. It just didn't happen.
Well, the intention was there.
But it's too late now because now I'm explaining it. And anyway, to support my battle rap lessons, please head over to patreon.com/secondprintpod. For as little as 5 smackaroos a month, we give you all sorts of bonus content, early access to these episodes, bonus content like Remzo versus the DCEU currently. He has done MCU Phase 1 and Phase 2 iterations of that. You have Tales from the Fucking Pile from me, Case of the Runs from me, random movie reviews and such that we'll definitely be hopping on for and getting ahead of whenever the next properties come out, I think is safe to say. And at some point, I don't know when, at some point, I will be having Mandalorian reviews. It might not be episode by episode. We might even just do a half-season review and a season review with good old Dan Smott. So lots of stuff going on behind that payroll. But you can do the 5 smackers. We're totally happy with you. That, in fact, we're happy if you just share the show with a friend and enjoy the experience and maybe leave us a 5-star rating and a great review. We're happy with all of that. However, you could also be a baller. You could be a baller like Jeffrey, an Infinity Gauntlet member. You could be a little lower than that, a Kirby Club member, and you could produce an episode of the show just like Jeffrey did today. You do not have to send us an omnibus to do that as well. That Jeffrey just is just the biggest baller of
pimp.
all. Exactly, the biggest
pimp.
Pimpin' Patreon. I always forget the third P.
Pimpin' Patreon producer.
Oh, yeah, the important one. That's all I got, Remzo. You want to take us home? See, you tried to have me take you home tonight. Now I'm going to make you take us home.
Well, folks, if there's one thing you can do, it's sweet, it's simple. Whisper it to your wife as she's falling asleep. It's read comics and change the world,
sweetie.
Good night, America.
Adios.